New Year's resolutions are a weird phenomenon. 80% of people don't keep them beyond the first 2 weeks of January, and a lot of us still make them in hopes that this will be the year. This will be the year where we do more, worry less, and make better decisions. We'll do yoga, we'll be a minimalist. No other time of year incites this amount of optimism or ambition. That feeling of a clean slate inspires us to be the best version of ourselves. We start new journals, set new goals, begin new habits, but days later, we're back to our same old routines. The laundry and unopened mail piles up, that journal sits maybe 7 pages filled out, if that. Giving up on our ambitious goals never feels good. Every resolution given up feels like another failure to add to the list. I've fallen into this trap almost every year now in recent memory. But weirdly enough, I think a video game I played in 2022 shook me out of that cycle, at least a little bit, and taught me that growth doesn't come in one day. This is how Sifu taught me not to quit. Before we get into the video essay, I just wanted to jump in here and remind you to subscribe and like the video for more content like this every single month. It's free and really helps the channel grow. Thank you so much. By my nature, I'm a quitter. That's just kind of the reality of how I've operated most of my life. And I have a history of getting in my own way. Maybe it's self-sabotage or just self-doubt, but there are so many things I've tried and given up on. I quit. A lot. Old YouTube channels, dead hobbies, even career paths, that bottomless pile of laundry, and that applies to a lot of video games too. So many unfinished titles that I fully intended to get through. And after trying it out, I thought Sifu was going to be another one of those games fated to never be completed. After a great tutorial where we see our father get killed in front of our eyes by a group of 5 assassins, we vow to exact vengeance on the people who are responsible. I was so excited to jump in and throw hands, but my first attempt at the game ended quickly and in frustration. I felt like all my punches were being thrown with glass knuckles. Every combo was being interrupted. This enemy, in particular, just demolished me no matter what I did. Again and again. And this was on normal difficulty, so was I just not cut out for this game? I was banging my head against a brick wall. A lot of games tie their progression to experience levels or collectibles. Experience that you can earn by repeating certain areas or optimizing your way through a game. And the more you engage with those mechanics, the easier your playthrough can become. Even games seen as incredibly difficult like Dark Souls or Darkest Dungeon can be undone by experience grinding a bit. You can over-level yourself if you spend an afternoon putting your axe to the grindstone. This can be great because even when you get stuck at a particularly rough section, you usually have an out. Experience farming can be something to fall back on if you need help wiggling out of a tough spot. But Sifu doesn't let you get away with that. Sure, I could grind through the first level over and over to permanently unlock the game's abilities, but that wouldn't guarantee my success. Not even close. So I decided to swallow my pride and start over, on easy difficulty this time. I would take on the game's medium difficulty again when I had completed my training montage. I was going to learn the secrets of every enemy and every level and just... oh shit. This was easy mode? I realized I wasn't going to be able to cheese my way through the game. Button mashing wasn't going to get me very far at all. I actually had to practice these moves, learn the counters, and be able to react to things in a split second. Less than that even. This game wasn't playing around. Sifu's all about taking your time to grow and learn as the player, not rushing things. One of the game's main mechanics is literally tied to aging to remind you how long it can take for someone to really learn and improve over the course of their lifetime. And even though this type of reward system doesn't usually speak to me in games, this one grabbed me, because there was no simple hack to beating any one boss, and spamming heavy attacks was definitely out of the question. Even when I looked up how to defeat one of the captains who was giving me trouble, that barely helped me at all. I really had to engage with all of the systems this game was presenting me with. It helps that Sifu's combat is also one of the most interesting systems I've encountered in a long time. Sloclap's kung fu masterpiece about avenging your father isn't something that encourages button mashing, which is different from pretty much any other kung fu inspired game that I've ever played. Sifu is meant to be learned, studied. You can't brute force this game. Not to be that video essayist, but the very deliberate flow of the combat reminds me of Dark Souls? Cue eye rolls. I know, but the parallels really are there. And that's what makes for really engaging combat to me. The feeling of a push and pull, which I briefly mentioned in this video essay about Stray's subversion of violence. The feeling that one wrong move could spell my defeat makes each encounter exciting. It's a sign of a well-balanced combat system that really asks you to stay engaged at every stage of a game's runtime. And it's rare to find games that do this as well as Sifu does. After understanding the flow of combat, even in my defeat, I felt like I knew what I did wrong and I could get up, dust myself off, and come one step closer on my next attempt. So over the course of the next few weeks, I slowly learned how each counter and attack worked together, what each fight was asking of me. I was learning this game's rhythm in real time. It's one thing for a game's combat mechanics to click over the course of a day or two, but it's another for it to actually take weeks for things to feel second nature. I was being drip-fed progress every time I picked up that controller. With every death came an upgrade. Every punch helped me improve. And I actually stuck with it until finally this enemy went down. And it felt incredible. There's so many other arcs like this that I had within the game too. The CEO, for example, took me ages. And don't even get me started on the second stage of the artist fight. So why did this game keep me pushing? What is it about Sifu's gameplay loop that didn't make me want to quit? Since we just talked about how that's been such an overarching trend in my gaming and personal life. Well, to figure out why something works, I often have to compare it to something that, at least for me, doesn't work. There's plenty of combat-focused video games like Sifu that don't hook me in the same way. A game like Sekiro actually shares a lot of similarities with the moment-to-moment gameplay of Sifu, that stance meter being a pretty immediate connection. But I've tried to get into Sekiro so many times, and every time I just put it down after a couple of hours. From Software's Samurai Fighter focuses almost exclusively on parrying, and as someone who never got good at the parrying mechanic in Dark Souls, this game was going to be a struggle for me from the moment I started. And not a very fun struggle, because parries aren't just helpful rewards for perfect timing like they are in Dark Souls. Here, they quickly become the only viable way to take down an enemy that stands between you and progress. There were never any interesting ways to approach different situations, and at least in my experience of the game, very little player expression. There always seemed to be just one answer to each problem. It came down to parrying or losing immediately. Quite literally, do or die. I was not having any fun. So I quit. What about another martial arts game with a steep learning curve? Well, Sifu isn't Sloclap's first foray into the martial arts. Before Sifu, there was Absolver. And while the fighting mechanics may look similar on the surface, they don't pack a punch in the same way that Sifu's did. Whereas throughout my time avenging my father's death, I felt like I wanted to grow and improve as a fighter, in Absolver, I just felt like I was going through the motions a bit. There wasn't anything driving me forward. I could tell Sloclap was really inspired by Dark Souls here, which is a cool concept. Dark Souls, but with Kung Fu? Yeah, that sounds cool. I'm in. From the sparse setting, to the lack of a clear story, to the invasion-style PvP. They even had doors that only opened from the other side. It had souls written all over it, but without any real idea of what was going on or what I was doing, I lost motivation to keep going pretty immediately. And despite the level of in-depth customization in the fight decks, I didn't feel like I was in control of anything in this game. You see, in Absolver, you can fully change and rearrange your combos to feature different attacks in any order you please. This is in direct opposition to most combo-focused fighting systems that I've interacted with. Most of the time in games like this, you're given a list of combos to master and register into your muscle memory. But here, Sloclap wanted to shake things up a bit in the 3D fighter space, going with a fully customizable loadout that they marketed as deceptively simple. But it really made no sense to me. There's stats and numbers and a wheel that can move to adopt different stances, but it seems to just randomly move wherever it wants in the middle of a combo. Everything made it feel like fluency was just out of reach. This kind of steep learning curve can just feel monotonous. And every time I was about to grasp a concept, something else came along to knock me back down. And that's when I realized something. I had been given too much power as the player, for my own liking anyway. And I was almost immediately overwhelmed. For as much as I talk about liking control in the games that I play, maybe I underestimate just how much control I actually want. A common theme for me is that largely self-directed experiences like open world games and most sandboxes lose my interest pretty quickly. I don't actually want to be given this much control because it echoes my real day-to-day life in which, as an adult, I'm in control of what I do with my time and energy. That freedom tends to just overwhelm me and see me shut down. The looming laundry pile is rearing its ugly head, and those blank pages of my many journals mock me. Because of my anxiety, I need a bit more structure to thrive and feel like I can work towards something. So the amount of freedom I had to change around everything, and in turn screw up everything about my build in Absolver, kept me from even wanting to get better at the combat. The gear, the stats, the shuffling of the combat deck, it was a hot mess to me. But I'd encourage you to check out the description for a link to try Absolver for yourself and tell me what you think about the game. It might click for you, even though it didn't for me. Pushing through each of Absolver's frustrations wasn't fun for me. The grind was tedious, and the learning curve never let up for me. So, yet again, I quit. I guess Sifu, for me anyway, is a perfect balance between a streamlined move pool and a varied level of player expression. This room in the game's first level is a great example, actually. I could brute force my way through crowds, or parry and counter my way through, or use a bunch of these weapons. I could even stealth my way around the perimeter before engaging the main group. The game's designed to give you the tools to take on everything pretty much any way that you want to. And even when you fail, you get thrown a bone because with each death, you get a chance at upgrading your skills or even becoming stronger as you age. You're never just failing. You're failing up. Similarly to games like Hades or Cult of the Lamb, where your death can sometimes feel like a reward, reframing your defeats as steps to reach success. And this eliminates the feeling of a game being a grind. But there's another element that really kept me playing too. The fighting mechanics were a little bit more streamlined and parrying was much more accessible. But the thematic storytelling in Sifu gives so much more weight to your journey as well. It was the complete opposite feeling that Absolver's world was giving me. Sifu's world was built to help me, to motivate me forward. The game's 5 stages create a colorful pastiche to play through on your cyclical adventure towards growth that keeps you motivated to try again and again to end a stage at a younger age or for more experience to be traded in for upgrades. From its unique death mechanics to the stages themselves, everything works hand in hand, feeding back into each other to keep you striving for better runs. This isn't by mistake either. Sloclap very deliberately designed the game's stages and boss fights to make you play through them several times. The game becomes a cycle of progress and growth. Speaking of these levels, they're very deliberately constructed. The closer we get to each hideout's leader, the more we see 5 elements taking over. The order of these elements felt very purposeful, and it turns out they directly correlate to the ancient Chinese belief system of Wu Xing, the 5 elements, or the 5 phases. This cycle of the elements observes the universe's ongoing and inevitable development. It's often applied in different ways, but these 5 phases always remain cyclical and are seen as common benchmarks in growth, both internally and in the world around us. The first element and level in our cycle naturally is wood, or Mu, which is connected with flexibility and opening oneself up to growth. And that's explored quite literally here through the design of this first level. As the further and further we dive into the center of the squats, the more plants we see growing, until Fajar's arena is completely enveloped by them. For a lot of players, this boss fight against the Botanist is where their journey ended. He's the first real roadblock in Sifu, and there's not really a quick trick on how to take him down. Button mashing will get you punished immediately, and he throws quite a few curveballs at you here in the early game. You just have to be ready to be flexible like the bamboo around you, and learn how to use the tools this game gives you to succeed. Bursting forth from Wude's growth is fire, or Wu, flickering with passion and strength. And interestingly, this battle against Sean is actually the easiest for players who, like me, tend towards an aggressive playstyle. After starting in a nightclub, the more progress we make in tracking down Sean, the second level's captain, the more this level starts to go up in flames. Charred roofs, burning structures, and in his second stage, Sean is far more careless and less prepared for our takedowns. The more pressure we put on him, the more easily he gets burned. After putting out Sean's flame, we dive into the cycle's next element, water, or shui. The home for this next step is the museum, within which endurance and patience are on display. Quite literally, we see them represented in some of the most memorable art installations throughout the museum. Meditative sculptures and this giant pendulum that never stops swinging. These two virtues of endurance and patience are in direct opposition to those linked with fire, but they're necessary to defeating Kuroki the artist. This is why my defeat by her Sensetsukan was so swift. That's her traditional Japanese segmented staff weapon, by the way. Rushing in to try and land a hit like we did with Sean will almost immediately get you punished with a nasty string of combos. And her second stage requires an even greater sense of patience as you wait to perfectly dodge and counter her projectiles. Determination and persistence are both associated with the metal or gene element, both good qualities of a business-oriented individual like a CEO, but also qualities needed by the player to make it through Jean Fang's iron defenses. As a boss who plays keep away for most of the fight, she can be a tough one to handle. She's quite a threat despite her missing arm and maturity, which might lead some foolish players to think that she'll be a pushover. However, they'll soon learn that the Iron CEO is not to be toyed with. And to defeat her, you need to be determined, to push through, headstrong, and commit to your movements. The only way past her long-ranged attacks is through them. The final element of Tu, or Earth's main quality of empathy, feels like a fairly abstract concept to include in a level's design until you realize that this last base is actually a spiritual resort in the mountains built to rehabilitate its occupants. Not only this, but it's where the game also clues you into its true themes and lessons that it has in store for you. Upon facing Yang and defeating him, we're treated to an ending, but not a true conclusion. We're shown killing him with one last blow, and then being reprimanded for it. This ending resonated with me. It's a poignant antithesis to most combat-focused games. So when I actually avenged the murder of my father at the end of Sifu here, I was expecting applause or excitement or something. But what the game gave me was remorse. I had just murdered someone who killed my father when I was a child, sure, but now I was the killer. I achieved my goal. I won. I pushed through that quitting mindset. I #grinded my way through these well-themed levels on a path to the end credits. I grew as a fighter through these stages of the Wu Xing cycle. But what for? This ending really puts the events of the game under a more empathetic lens. A really hard-hitting way to end my first clear of the story. I realized I got the bad ending. This isn't the way the game wanted me to tackle things at all. That's the thing about cycles though. They keep going. I started a second playthrough and began my journey again, with the seeds of empathy sown, ready to grow towards my next goal, sparing these 5 characters and trying to understand their perspectives. In ancient Chinese martial arts, Wude is the idea that one must possess both strong character and admirable behavior to overcome any obstacle, no matter how insurmountable. It's a martial morality that's at the heart of these fighting styles, where behavioral ethics and character ethics combine. Showing our adversaries mercy in the face of their hostility towards us proves our respect and ethical character as a fighter, rather than stooping down to their violent level. While a lot of games feature martial arts combat, a lot of the time it does just feel like it's for the aesthetics of the fighting style. They look great when animated well. And to Sifu's credit, the animation of each movement does look amazing. Sloclap's mocap was integrated incredibly to give these bouts some real weight, but the philosophy and teaching behind a lot of martial arts training shines through in the gameplay too, showing the devs had a real appreciation for the art form, not just because you strive to better yourself across different runs or the elemental cycle of growth, but also the concept of Wude, and it's not an abstract connection either. To achieve peace for my protagonist character, I needed to embrace the idea of Wude and empathy for my opponent. The true ending is locked behind sparing all 5 of the bosses you encounter, each of whom become much more three-dimensional people the more we find out about them through clues in the game's lore. And that can only be achieved through careful gameplay punctuated by blocks and parries rather than whittling down their HP. Although the concept of Wude in real life actually has no ties to sparing your opponents, this was probably the closest way that Sloclap could teach this lesson to players with gameplay versus through a string of dialogue-laden cutscenes. Artistic liberties, but if you ask me, done effectively to illustrate a point through interactivity. As players, even when we're presented with tragic antagonists or seemingly sympathetic villains, our minds don't usually first go in the direction of sparing them. If we're presented with a monumental fight, it's usually punch first and ask questions later, or maybe read an item description. We've been trained to instinctively put our dukes up when we see a big health bar, so a lot of players won't even know that sparing Sifu's bosses is an option. And this essentially adds an extra layer of difficulty to all of these fights, because now I not only needed to survive these fights again, I also needed to keep an eye on the boss's health gauges to make sure I didn't deplete them before bringing down their posture gauges with counters and well-timed blocks. To achieve the true Wude ending, you essentially need to throw aside the mentality you've had up until this point. Instead of pushing through, you now have to learn to quit. Quit playing so aggressively. Quit going on the offensive. Quit trying to avenge your father, because that's never what he wanted you to do anyway. He didn't want you to weaponize your rage to become a murderer. He wanted you to grow, turn your passion into patience, and harden your determination, but never so much as to forget your empathy. So, great, I defeated every boss and then spared every boss. So what? Well, Sifu isn't just a game about punching and kicking your way to the finish line. The game itself is designed to change the way you think about fighting, and the way you see life's challenges. During my second playthrough, as cheesy as it sounds, Sifu taught me how to be okay with letting go of what I once thought was my main objective, and the power of rolling with the punches, literally. You actually make quicker progress by reacting to your opponent instead of spamming the attack buttons. A guard and then subsequent throw will almost always get you further than an aggressive combo. Sifu's narrative is about forgiveness, forgiving others, and forgiving yourself. It's about letting go of rage. As tempting as the easier path of murder can feel, the much more difficult path of forgiveness and compassion is the one most encouraged by the game. And through picking that harder path of letting go, our character smiles for the first and only time in the entire game. I'm used to giving up before reaching the finish line, and living with that regret. I regret dropping out of college twice. I regret dropping all of those documentary projects that never got funded. I regret a lot of things that I've started and not had the motivation to follow through with. It's why something like recently becoming a YouTube partner means so much to me. Not necessarily for the $25 I've made from ads so far, but rather for the satisfaction that I've stuck with something. As silly as that sounds, I'm really fucking proud of myself. So even though this game about beating up people taught me how to stick through things when they're hard, in equal measure, it also showed me the importance of giving yourself permission to let go and to move on, reframing those choices to not continue down a path as steps in a cycle rather than simply quitting. Because had I not let go of these paths and projects that I've spent so much time regretting and trying to forget and run away from, I wouldn't be the person I am right now recording this voiceover. And actually, I've never been happier than where I am right now. So many other games try to achieve what Sifu has managed so effortlessly, making the player yearn to get better at their skill-based combat system, to improve. But for so many reasons, Sifu succeeds where most of its contemporaries falter. It motivates the player through gameplay and narrative themes simultaneously. And it teaches the player so much more over its runtime than just how to press buttons quickly. It's a subtle lesson. Whereas a game like Sekiro is about growth in service of revenge, Sifu just looks like it's about revenge. It's actually a tale of growth in spite of vengeance. How quitting and giving up are two very different things. To quit does not have to mean defeat. Mindfully stepping away is not a failure. Sifu didn't just teach me to keep pushing, but it also helped me reframe my life's failures. Being stuck in the same job for almost a decade, my middling achievements in life as I'm turning 30 this year, my inability to get through this endlessly growing stack of laundry. It helped me reframe all of that as another step in my path to becoming who I am right now. Sifu taught me that sometimes letting go is the healthiest thing we can do. Which is why I'm never touching hard mode. Fuck that. And please remember, even when you quit, you are not a failure. Hey there, thank you so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to click the like button down below and subscribe to the channel. It really helps the video reach more people. And since I spend 40+ hours on these video essays every single month, it would really mean the world. Speaking of helping out, these videos aren't cheap to make. So if you believe in the content and want to see me do this full time, you can always support me over on Ko-fi. It's kind of like Patreon, but a whole lot better. A huge thank you to all of my monthly supporters over on that Ko-fi page: Nightmare God, Undies Marita, Voxamandius, Mumpow, Veltwalker, Puzzled Monkey Tree, Robertson, Cap Danvers, The Werewolf, Oyster Milk, Dear Papaya, Bean Fiello, Jar Draws Pixels, and Max Wattage. For as little as $4 a month, you can become a monthly supporter over on that Ko-fi page. You'll get shoutouts at the end of every video here, sneak peeks at future content, and behind the scenes looks at how these videos get made. Also, if you want to check out any of the games that I mention in any of my video essays here, there's always affiliate links to them down in the description. They help the channel and trans charities at the same time at no extra cost to you, and sometimes they have sales that Steam doesn't even have. So it's worth a look. Anyway, thank you again. It means the world that you watched until the end of the video. Thank you so much. And until next time, oh yeah, share the video.